Hi there, class. This is a slide deck video covering business letters and some strategies for revision. I've put these together to help support you in the assignment called Revising a Letter for Objectivity. So just to start a little bit about what a business letter looks like, I've got this sample here. This is one that I found on the internet. And the content isn't really as important as much as the format or the way that it looks. So a couple of notes about business letters and how they might be different than other kinds of documents you've written before. Business letters are typically written for readers or audience outside of a business. So if you're working in a business like an airline, a letter would be used to be sent to perhaps a customer or perhaps a business that you want to work with, or perhaps a future employee or someone who's left the company. It's not as common that they're written for people inside the office. If you're doing that, the type of document that's typically used would be either an email or a memo. So a couple of things as far as format that will be consistent across most or all business letters will be an inclusion of mailing addresses here. And this is even if you're not sending it through the mail. If you're planning to send the letter over email or physically hand it to someone, including the mailing address is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's going to show where the people can be contacted if a follow-up message is needed. And it also provides a format that can be used if you do need to mail it. Folding the letter goes right into an envelope, and the recipient's address should be sticking out the window if you're using a business envelope with a window. Business letters will also include the date. Everything on the letter is justified to the left, so there's no text in the middle, like in the center of the document, or adjusted to the right side. Everything's along the left margin over here. In addition to the addresses, both your address as the sender and the recipient's address, you're going to open with a salutation, and I've never really seen anything other than "Dear" followed by the name of the person. It's customary to refer to someone using their official title and their last name, so "Dear Mr. or Ms." I would really discourage using the title MISS, Miss, or MRS, Mrs., unless you know that the person uses that title and prefers to use it. It's just a feature about the English language that some of these titles are gendered, whereas we have MR. The other ones that you might use, DR if you know the person's a doctor, and then the military uses titles as well. I say use dear because while it might be common in like an email to open and say, "Hey Ryan," or "Hi Ryan," or something else, a little less casual, a business letter is probably one of the more formal types of documents that you might write as a business writer. After that, you'll have, business letters can be very short. Some of them can be longer. They can be multiple pages if necessary. As I said, all the text is justified on the left side. It's single-spaced. Generally, the advice is to use a standard legible font, so something like Times New Roman or similar. And then use short paragraphs to help organize your letter. It's very difficult to read a letter if you have one very large paragraph that takes up the entire page. And then finally, down here at the bottom, business letters or official letters like this will always conclude with the word "sincerely." Again, in a less formal piece of writing like an email, you might see people sign off and say "best" or any other kind of thing like that. But in a business letter, it's going to be pretty much standard all the time. "Dear recipient, sincerely" at the end, your name. It's customary to leave space, at least 2, typically 3 spaces, so that you can include your signature, either handwritten or put a digital signature in, and follow that up with your name typed out so that it's legible, as well as your title if you have one at the business. So a couple of things, since this assignment really is less about writing a letter, we will have chances to do that more in this class. It's more about revising this existing letter that's written in a way that's kind of mean, I might say, mean or snarky. A couple of notes for how you might revise for better tone. Tone is really important because of the way that it connects you to the audience or the reader, the people that you anticipate to take in your message, how they're going to be reading it, and then the reasons why they're reading it and what you hope they do because of reading it. So these are some questions you can ask yourself. Why are you writing the document? Are you trying to persuade someone to do something? Are you informing them of good news or bad news? Or is there some other reason why you're writing it? In this case, you're kind of trying to navigate a difficult situation where the customer or client has a complaint and you're trying to respond professionally in a way that respects their point of view, but also at the same time is not going to put your business out of business because you just give everybody free refunds for everything. So it's important to understand who you're writing to and what you want or need them to understand. Taking the time also to think about how they're going to receive the message. The moment you write the message is different than the moment the person opens the envelope or opens the email and reads the message. So think about what it's going to be like for them whenever they access your message. And what kind of tone are you going to use? Do you want to be friendly? Do you want to be elaborate and provide lots of details? Or do you want to be a little bit more succinct and concise and short and to the point? Those are decisions that you will need to make. Some tips if you want to strive to have business tone generally. Start by being confident. Whatever your message is, know what your message is and do your best to communicate it with confidence. Aspects of that are being courteous and polite and respectful and also sincere. So don't say anything if you don't really mean it. A business letter is probably not the best place for jokes, often because they can be misunderstood. So be actually sincere, mean whatever you're saying or writing in this case. In some situations, you will maybe need to be writing a letter to someone who is your supervisor or your manager, or you might need to be writing to someone who is subordinate to you. They're your employee or something like that. So be mindful as far as those different dynamics in terms of hierarchy or power and how writing within that is something you can consider. There is a table in our reading, I think, that's actually really helpful, and I can show that. Be careful to not use discriminatory language. This almost goes without saying, but I do have to say it. We all have various biases. We've got different backgrounds and have different assumptions. A way to help avoid that is to have someone else read your letter before you send it, but really do your best to avoid discriminatory language. A recent survey of employers conducted through Business Communication Scholarship found that this was the number one thing that employers expect a new employee to be able to do is basically not offend people by being discriminatory in their language choices. I don't anticipate that'll be a problem with our class, but it's worth stating nonetheless. One thing you can do is to think about what's the upside of whatever message you're communicating. Even if you're communicating bad news, try to emphasize some of the benefits for the reader if you can, or on the positive note, using language like that. And then think too about the technicality or difficulty of the message. Some messages, you can go into the technicalities if the person reading it really expects that, but it can also be a problem to write something that's really overly technical for a reader who doesn't have that background information. Think, for example, about an IT or software engineer writing about some complicated, computer software for a customer who doesn't really understand it. It can be a problem if they're just writing or speaking above their head. If you're interested, these and more tips can be found on the website, the Purdue OWL, and I encourage you to think about them as you work through this assignment. So this assignment also calls for you to edit or revise this existing letter, so I thought I'd share a few different ways you can approach this. These strategies will also be helpful for you throughout this class, anytime you're engaging with peer review or peer response and working from a first draft to a subsequent draft of any assignment. These are basically 4 levels of editing. They really mean different things. Sometimes we say editing or revising or proofreading as if it means the same thing. Hopefully this will help make it clear how these things are different. And over here on this side, I like to say some of these are going to take more time. If you have the time to do the ones that take more time, they will have a bigger payoff. But the smaller ones like proofreading can be valuable as well. They take a little bit less time. So in brief, these 4 levels, if we start with the one that involves the most work, it's going to be revising. These are when you're really changing things up. And I would say that for this assignment of revising the letter for objectivity, you're probably going to be doing this kind of work. You probably will be rewriting sections altogether. You'll really be thinking about the tone, among other things, but you could also be even changing the subject or who you anticipate reading it as well. Do you think the person reading the letter is going to be friendly to your message, or are you approaching them as an adversary or someone who's trying to take advantage of you? Those kinds of adjustments would be revision. And I say they're really high in terms of the workload, but the payoff is big. Substantive editing is a little bit different. Here you might be moving around in terms of the organization, the way the document looks. These are a little bit more focused on aesthetics, but if you're working within paragraphs, they can also work on the content, so the words that you're saying as well. These second or last 2 levels are the ones that I think students most commonly associate with the revision process. They're important, but like I said, if you're making those bigger changes, that tends to be where the bigger payoff comes. Copy editing is where you're looking at sentences and paragraphs and making changes to things like tone or the style, so you're maybe making it more professional or less casual. That would be an example of copy editing. And then finally, proofreading is where you're looking like word by word, punctuation mark at a time to check for things like grammar and spelling. And I've got a note here that for this class, generally the proofreading, while it is important, I don't think it's the most important part. I try to emphasize that revision and copy editing and substantive editing, those types of things are actually going to be more important in this class. And that certainly is true for this assignment. So ultimately, the question here to ask is what level of editing you think you're comfortable working with and why are you working there? I hope with this assignment you're willing to change things up. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.